Okay, yeah. So he said, um, I need to talk to you. And he said, um, you are everything, like I need to talk to you. And she said, excuse me, man, I cannot speak to you. If my husband finds out, my husband's not home, but if he finds out that there's a man in front of the door, got some sage going on here. If there's a man in front of the door, he will kill you. And my great grandfather said, your husband can't do anything to me. And he was aware that, um, I believe he was aware of who his husband, what her husband was. And he said to him, I'm a general. Nobody can touch me here. I'm well known. So he just kept telling her all these things, confirmation that not to be startled. And he said, listen, something about you, although I can't see what you look like. And he looked into her eyes, and she had like green gray eyes, green blue gray eyes. The way my eyes are, you know how they change too? Very similar to mine. Because my grandfather, I have his color eyes, and apparently he adapted that from his mother and their family. So my great grandfather had like blue eyes, but my eyes, guys, it changes, and my eyes go from like gray to green to blue, and then because my pupils shoot out, sometimes they look dark. So and then all of a sudden he said, listen, my wife passed away, and he said she had a baby sister, and during the Armenian genocide she was taken, and or she was killed. He goes, I don't know, but my wife has told me this. And he said, you have my wife's legs. Nobody has my wife's legs. And apparently she had like soccer legs, or like that's what I was told. Like her legs were not like very feminine. They were I don't have those legs, but she had like really lanky and like soccer type of legs. Just the shape and the knees and everything. Um and he said, does this ring a bell with you? Do you remember your childhood? And she stopped. And she listened, and she said, no. And she said, when I grew up, um, I was little. I never knew my parents. Apparently, I heard my parents were killed. I was never told if I have any brothers or sisters. And she said, I was raised by an Arabic man. Apparently, the story goes to say, apparently, she was crying there. She must have been 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, maybe even younger, maybe a year and a half. And a merchant, an Arab merchant, was passing by the cliff, and he saw a little girl there. So those soldiers must have forgotten about her, because usually they would, they take those kids and they sell them, or whatever. And the Arabic merchant kept her as her own and he raised her until she got her period, puberty, and then, and he never touched her. Like, he didn't sexually touch her or anything, because in countries like that, a Christian, a blonde or a redheaded Christian, is considered to be gold. They sell them to like high marketed like people, in like the politic industry or like agriculture or anything, mainly like political and business and stuff, because they help them flourish. Mind you, the Young Turks that formed Turkey were Zionists. They weren't Muslims, okay? The Young Turks were Zionists that formed the country Turkey. So the soldiers, the fighters, could have been Muslim, but they were also Zionists. But those, like Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, they were all Zionist guys. So all of a sudden, he said, take off your headpiece. And she trusted him, and she took off her headpiece, and she had that gold hair, and the face was identical to his wife. So he said, you are my wife's daughter. And he goes, I'm gonna spend the rest of my life. Mind you, my great grandfather was an old man at this point of his life, okay? He was never caught. He escaped. The everything, the Ottoman prisons, and him escaping, he had to go underneath the sea on his own. Nobody helped him, nobody saved him. He was swimming underneath the sea and he escaped. And when he got his hands on that horse and his weapons, it was after he established he had those passports and everything to trick the soldiers and the government. And there was wanted signs for him in Turkey because he escaped, and he was known to be, they used to say, oh, he's like God, he gets away with everything. So all of it, and then she said he raised me, and after she got her period, she was sold to a very rich government official Turkish man. It's like you're leaving one thing and you're going right back to it, huh? Reminds me of myself. This is how you know your DNA, guys. Your DNA, your ancestors, your children, it repeats itself. Everything that I've been through in this life is because of something that's already been done to my ancestors. So, and she was about 11 or 12 years old, and her husband was 50. They married her off to a government official Turkish man, Zionist Turkish man. At the age, he was 50 and she was 11 or 12. And the first thing that they did when he bought her off was he had her tattooed with her entire body. And when I say her entire body, like my body's tattooed, right? But her body was all entirely tattooed, but they tattooed like her lips, they tattooed her chin, they tattooed her face. Because in the Muslim faith, a man has every right to do the way he pleases, and they have a thing where if the man chooses a certain thing, he doesn't want any other man to stare at her. And knowing that she was a Christian and Armenian, it's like a property or ownership type of thing. So they did like not just flowers, but like Turkish symbols and like on her, all over her face, Turkish symbols, property of his name, and they had a son. They had one son, and the son ended up coming home, and he heard everything. He heard everything. And so the boy was very young. He was like 11, 12, 13, or maybe even a little older, and he was freaked out as to why his father would allow this to happen, because he had no idea. She didn't even know she was Armenian. She just knew that she had no parents. She thought she was an Arab, or Turkish, and she was brought up in like Turkish schools and Arabic schools. She would go from one school to another, and then she'd get kicked out because the kids would always make fun of her. You have to know in Turkey, because apparently he was living in Turkey and he left and he came to Syria, which is weird. Because why would you leave? I'm talking about her husband, right? Like, she was taken back to Turkey when she was sold for this man, for this Zionist 50-year-old man, her husband. And then they came to Syria for some form of like business thing. So this is how you know, guys, that what's happening right now in Syria was planned from the Ottoman times, okay? It was planned from the Armenian genocide. This is why I always say, in order to understand the modern time roots of genocide as to what's happening in Africa, as to what's happening wherever in the world, Middle East right now, the root was the Armenian genocide. And this is why I tell people you need to study the Armenian genocide, because they're still planning, okay? They're continuing. It's continuing. And there are Africans, there are black people that have the Amalekite gene. Just because you're black or just because you're white doesn't mean you don't have that gene, okay? We are all blood, we are all brothers, we are all related, and this whole damn thing is a freaking trick, okay? When it comes to this Amalekite gene that they're trying to destroy. So, yeah, and so she found out, my mother, my grandmother, everybody ended up meeting her. She left. The husband found out. He came home. The husband admitted everything. He said, yeah, I married you knowing you were Armenian Christian. Yeah, I did that to you. And and then he left. He stormed off. He left, and I don't know what happened. I don't know if my great grandfather did anything to him or if he got away with it. I don't know about that, but because of this, um, I remember she would say, like, the story goes to show that because of this, her son ended up leaving. He went to Germany, married a German woman, and she